We're talking with Tim McRae from Meat and Livestock Australia. Tim, your main message today, particularly firstly with flock number, and what are you finding across the country when it comes to the number of lambs that are going through to maturity now?
Every 6 months we do our forecast, and underpinning that is the sheep flock number. Now, what we've seen in the last 6 months is a lot more producers are holding on to their ewe lambs, they're joining them. They're making the most of a better season and those ewe lambs being at heavier weights. So as a response of that, we've seen a decline or a contraction in the amount of lambs coming to market, but at the same time that's going to come through as an increased sheep flock in the coming years and more lambs down the track. So it's been a bit of a step backwards to increase numbers in the future.
Has the price, though, seen still a large number of ewe lambs hitting the market for the meat trade? Oh,
certainly it's a large component. But what we have seen in particularly the last 3 months, is the disruptions from the flooding and the really wet year have gone. And we've seen more lambs coming in, and that has put pressure on prices. But at the same time, we had seen the lamb price really go to quite high levels. That was, from a whole of chain viewpoint, probably unsustainable.
What about from a lambing point at the moment? The winter has been reasonably mild across eastern Australia, though there have been a couple of cold outbreaks. But are you optimistic that we're going to have a reasonable lambing?
Yeah, I think overall it's certainly going to be better than drought condition lambing. I think there's a lot of regions, and I think it really is an area by area equation. You go down to Victoria and South Australia, they're too wet. You're talking about their lambs being delayed and having some problems with the moisture, whereas some other places are looking for a good drop of rain. But I think overall it's going to be a good lambing. Our feedback from producers is that they are expecting a better lambing this year, and that'll correspond to more lambs either being available for slaughter or indeed being turned back for rebuilding next year.
Well, let's look around the world and production and therefore demand. And what are you noting in some of the major production companies that do export lamb to other parts of the world?
When you look at the global exporters of lamb, Australia and New Zealand are out in front by a long, long way. But what we're seeing is New Zealand's actually having contraction in their sheep flock and their lamb export. So it's really left Australia as the real big boy in the global market with product available to meet global demand. We are seeing some signs of flock growth in countries like Uruguay and Argentina, but their flocks are well below what we have. Their production levels are well below. So when you're looking for when globally they're looking for a country to source more lamb, Australia's at the top of that list.
From a price point of view, we've seen some forward contracts, 650 cents a kilo, but the price has come back a fair bit. What's your outlook for the next 6 months?
I don't think we're going to see prices go back to the $6, $6.50 level. That was a really disrupted market, if you like. But I do think we're going to see it stay, $4.30 to $4.80 over the next few months. There'll be pressure as younger lambs come in, and it could go below that if we do see seasonal conditions. If we do have a hot start to spring and feed deteriorate. But I think overall, we're still looking at a year where feed's going to be good and producers, for once, are going to have the ability to decide what they do, because they're going to have feed supplies and not be forced their hand by seasonal conditions. Now,
you had some good news today, and when you looked at some of the markets around the world, and particularly the Asian area, what are you noting when it comes to, and the Middle East, what are you noting when it comes to demand in those markets? Yeah,
we've seen demand from Asia increase significantly in recent years, and particularly China. And the great thing about the Chinese market is they take a lower valued product, they take breast and flat meat, which a lot of markets find that hard to sell, but in China they really like it. It suits the way they use it in their cuisine, and all that does is add a lot more value to the carcass, and in the end that adds value back to the processor, to the exporter, and all the way back to the producer. So growth in Asia has been really critical, and it just complements the product they're taking to the higher valued markets like the US, who like to take the sweet cuts.
Will they pay, though, these quite high prices?
I think when you look at the Chinese market, they've shown they'll pay. I mean, there's growth there. It is a lower priced product to start with, but the price they're paying is pulling that product away from the more traditional markets, which used to be South Africa, PNG, for that lower quality sheep meat protein product.
What about Australia? Retail prices up around 200%. Is that sustainable? Will consumers continue to pay, or are you finding that restaurants and consumer demand has been topped because of those high prices?
Yeah, if we go back and look for the last 10 years, lamb prices have gone up 200% at retail, whereas beef prices have only gone up half of that. So you're looking at a case, and particularly in the last 12 months, where we have heard that supermarkets, retailers, food service, restaurants are really finding it difficult to make returns off selling lamb on their menu. And when they do that, they look to either other products or look to alternative cuts of that product. So it's certainly been a factor, and I think that's where my message today about the sustainability of the industry is it was starting to become a real constraint about how these higher prices were being passed through, and consumers were starting to not turn away from lamb, but they were certainly aware that it was rising in price.
You talk about sustainability. What message were you trying to get across then to producers about keeping a sustainable industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's always difficult to go to producers and tell them that prices aren't going to go back to where they were 3 or 4 months ago. But I think the run that lamb prices have been nearly amazing to some extent, given what other commodities have done. But when you look at the whole industry, and the whole industry involves processors and exporters and consumers and retailers, everyone through that chain at some point in time needs to be able to make a return and needs to see the incentive for remaining in the industry or selling lamb or processing lamb. And for a period of last year, it was becoming really difficult for some segments of that chain to make returns. Fantastic. The prices to producers were long deserved and a reward of carrying sheep through a drought. But for retailers, if they're looking to make money and lamb is high priced and they find it hard, they turn to other products, and that in the end, for the long term of the industry, can be a big negative.
Tim McRae, thanks for talking to us today.
Thank you.